About 15 years ago, I had the chance to live in Italy for a couple of years. And one of those years, I lived in the city of Rome. And I remember vividly thinking that I was in that year going to be able to see everything Rome had to offer. And so soon after I got there, I realized that that was not going to be the case, that I would actually need a lifetime to actually view and experience everything Rome had to offer. Because Rome is really kind of the cradle of Western civilization. And it is, I oftentimes like to refer to it as a historical lasagna, because literally the city has been built layer upon layer upon layer of different historical moments, structures, and historical components that make that city so rich. Matter of fact, there was a church near my apartment called the Basilica of San Clemente, and there that church literally is built on various temples and structures over the course of history, so that when you walk into the church, it looks like a church from the Renaissance. When you take the steps down below, you enter into a home of a Roman that was an early Christian that used his home as a gathering place for Christians. And then if you then take steps even more below that, you encounter the home of a Roman citizen well before the beginning of Christianity. So in that one building, the Basilica of San Clemente, it's a real snapshot of what the rest of the city is like. And so there was no way I was going to see everything. And I've been to that city many times over the course of my life and have yet to see it all, because every time I go, I discover more. So to get to the bottom of this historical lasagna, we need to start with the mythological creation story of Remus and Romulus, the founders of the Roman civilization. Now, images of Remus and Romulus can be found just about everywhere in Roman civilization, from mosaics to coins to famous sculptures just as this, where you have these two infant twin brothers suckling at the body of a wolf. But how did these two young infants end up being raised by a wolf? Well, that's where the story gets a bit interesting. Now, the story goes that Remus and Romulus were thrown into the river by their jealous uncle, who feared that when they grew up, they would seize power. And so the mother, wanting to save her children's life, put them in a basket on the river. We're familiar with this with stories like Moses, for instance. But in this case, Remus and Romulus float down until they are found by a wolf, a she-wolf. And the story goes that the she-wolf raises these two young infants, nursing them until they become young children, and then they eventually become the rulers of these tribes that are the beginning of the Roman civilization. As they grow older, both of these brothers take residence in one of the 7 hills of Rome, as you can see here. The 2 main hills are the Palatino, which is where Romulus resides, and then Aventino is where Remus resides. And this is where the conflict begins, because when they have to decide which of these hills is going to be the foundation of this new civilization, they can't come to an agreement. One prefers the hill over the other. And what they do is going to be indicative of much of the Roman civilization, or more specifically the Roman Empire, because rather than resolve this conflict peacefully, they decide to battle it out. And in doing so, only one of them could survive. And that individual who does survive is Romulus, which is why we call the name of the city Rome rather than Remus. Romulus was the obvious victor, and thus the name of the city and eventually the empire is Rome. So the official tribe of Rome is then going to be centered around the Palatine Hill. And this is important because every leader or every emperor that is going to be part of or head the Roman civilization is going to reside on the Palatine Hill. It's actually the word is where we get the base for the word palace. Comes from the word Palatino. And of course, when we hear the word palace, we hear of this luxurious place where somebody of value or some leader resides there. So this early Roman tribe consists of people who are of different backgrounds, because Romulus does something quite important. Because there weren't too many people there, and in order to create a civilization that's going to grow, you need to have a large population. And so what he does is he creates a hole in the center of the Palatine Hill, where he invites people from all over the known area. Those people who had been rejected by other societies and civilizations to come to Rome, and by carrying some dirt from their birthland, throw that dirt into this hole, and in doing so become Roman citizens themselves, or part of this early Roman tribe. Now, let's be clear, these people were not like the Romans we think of now in their togas and their elegance and their large sculptures and buildings. These were tribal people who organized themselves in a loose sense of a government, right? They each had their individual thoughts and practices. Some had different religious beliefs, but they came together and tried to organize themselves in these rough-hewn caves and huts, and this was going to be the beginning of the Roman Empire. Eventually, in time, these groups of people begin to organize themselves more and more, and we get the beginning of the true Roman civilization in a period called the Roman Republic. Now, what is a republic? Essentially, a republic is much like what we have here in the United States, where you have representatives. You have your Congress people and your senators, and each of them is representing a particular part of the Roman civilization, in our case, parts of the country. The actual name republic comes from the Latin word res publica, which means concern of the people. So there was this sense that there was a real citizenry here that was in some ways democratic. They would elect these senators to the republic, and these groups of people would make decisions that would eventually affect the greater whole of Roman society. And eventually, over the course of many, many years, the Rome that we think of begins to take form. And specifically in the Roman Forum, the center, the heart of the city of Rome, and eventually the Empire of Rome. It is here where the senators gather and meet. It's also here where we have the major religious buildings that are going to represent the faith and spirituality of the Roman civilization. And you can see here how well organized these buildings are, and what they're eventually going to mean is the power. These buildings are going to be the expression of the power of the Republic. Now, at the center here is where an orator would go out and actually read the rules and regulations that had been decided in that day to the greater Roman citizens. There was no internet, of course. There was no mailing that would go out to every citizen. So they had to gather and listen to the orator who was voicing the rules and decisions of the Senate. Roman citizens were not allowed to go into the Senate, so this was their only connection to the Senate and their decisions. So from there, these rules would be written and expanded across the city. Now, one more important feature in the forum was something called the umbilicus urbis, or essentially the urban umbilical cord. We all know what an umbilical cord is. It's the way a mother feeds its young unborn child until it is born, and we still have reminiscences of that on our bodies and our belly button. And so this is literally the belly button of Roman civilization. And how this umbilical cord spot, the location of this on the Roman Forum, is important is because it's the very place where Romulus built that pit where people from all across the European continent were invited to be citizens of Rome, and when they carried that dirt from their native lands and threw it in there, they were creating the center of the Roman civilization, which is really important to understand. No other civilization prior to this had invited people from other places, from other cultures, from other lands to be part of their growing civilization. Traditionally, people had to be born in a place and became a citizen or a member of a tribe that was specific to a particular location. In this case, Rome was doing it differently. This is going to be key to the Roman success, the ability to invite and embrace people from other parts of the world to be part of the Roman civilization. So this Roman umbilical cord is the center of the Roman city and eventually will be the center of the Roman Empire. And it sits right at the center of the Roman Forum, which is the main square and political and religious center of Rome. Literally, everything else that is going to evolve from the Roman Empire is going to radiate, it's going to emerge from this specific site.